ahead and broadcast here.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the RSA Cloud Security beer tasting. We're going to unmute everybody. That we're going to keep this as an open forum, but during the presentation, if you're not talking or don't have a question, please mute yourself. We'll be getting started here in just a few moments. So hopefully everyone got their beer, and we'll be learning about the beer as we go through cloud security with Mr. Ben today. So give just a few minutes to join. We'll get rolling here in just a couple of minutes. All right, well, go ahead and get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Advizex RSA Cloud Security Beer Tasting. We have Ben Smith, who's out of Virginia, with us today from RSA, who's going to be leading the discussion. And we also have Eric Finch from Black Abbey Brewery that we're really looking forward to hearing from. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and start with Eric here and get us started on our first beer.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the party. We are Black Abbey Brewing Company from Nashville, Tennessee. Founded in 2013, started by three, the common story, a couple of home brewers met in a club and said, you know, maybe we should do this professionally one day. And then they talk themselves out of it and then miraculously talk themselves back into it. So those of us who enjoy drinking and selling this brand, thank them for that moment of craziness. But John Owen is our head brewer, and he's joined by Carl Meyer and Mike. For reasons I can't explain right now, I am blanking on Mike's name, but Mike is their third partner. And they are very passionate about Belgian influences. The Black Abbey is a reference to the name of the, or kind of a colloquial name for the church where Martin Luther was. I'm trying to think of the right term, but he wasn't really the pastor, but you know, whatever it was in the 15th century. And he, so there's a lot of sort of references to things related to Martin Luther and some of the sort of Belgian characteristics that run through the center of this brand. The Rose, which is the first beer that we'll kind of jump into initially, is probably the clearest picture of that. It's the core beer from the lineup, and it is it's a Belgian blonde ale. I was chatting with the group a little bit before starting that's sort of an unusual beer to lead. A lot of folks obviously lead with an IPA or a Pils or a lighter style. And so for this to be the beer that represents a little over half of our overall sales is I think a pretty significant statement on how dedicated to the concept that we are of honoring Belgian styles at various points during our production and beer decision-making process. So you know, we're in the middle, I suppose, of the pack as far as production size in Nashville. There's a couple of beers that are pretty strong. Yeah, Ron, the Rose, yep, Belgian blonde. We're very proud of our production, of our consistency. We have a beautiful tap room we lovingly call the Fellowship Hall, and we are, you know, we're very, very proud of what we do, and so excited to be here today and participating with y'all all over the, you know, wherever you are located. I understand there's a few folks from some different parts of the country, and I think that's amazing to be able to send some Nashville love out to some other spots. What else can I tell you right now, Ben? Are you up?
I am absolutely up. So that's a great start to this afternoon for everybody. From RSA's perspective, you know, we had a great conversation with Advizex prior to this event, and I want to point out the obvious. We thought it might be a little dangerous to stand between you and the beer, so that's why we wanted to get you started at least on one beer before I started with my content. And the good news is, even though we are blocked out for probably close to an hour and a half, I'm not going to occupy anywhere near that. I'm just going to go for about 10 or 12 minutes right now, just to kind of set the stage, with your permission, of course, Mr. and Mrs. Audience Member. Let me go ahead and rearrange my desktop here, and I'm going to bring up my title slide. We did start, you know, it's a deceptively strong can of beer that Eric has started us off with. So, you know, as long as you do not see my head, you know, kind of going all over the place here, that's a sign that you haven't drunk too much. If you did see my head move around, might be a problem. Might be a problem. So I am here obviously to talk to you about cloud security. What I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about RSA, just one slide, and then we'll kind of get into the business problem. I'm going to talk a little bit about business and technology. Like I said, I'm going to go maybe 10, maybe 12 minutes, and then I'm going to get out of the way. We're going to bring the subject matter expert, Eric, right back in at that point, and then he'll bring me back at the next intermission. So with that, let me go ahead and advance here. One slide, guys, I always try and run this through a filter so I can at least bring at least one image that is germane or relevant to the event. This was the only thing I could find in my clip art library that had both a beer and a cloud in it. So for what it's worth, here's your one relevant image to kind of support the talk track that I'm going to be bringing to you today. And that talk track, again, starts with RSA, the company. So when people hear those three letters, RSA, they typically think of three different things. You might be thinking of RSA as in three individuals, Ron Rivest, Adi Shamir, and Lynn Edelman. That's where the RSA comes from. Three academics more than 40 years ago created something called a public key crypto system. The good news for you is this is not an in-depth overview of public key cryptography, but I can promise you this, you use this RSA algorithm every day, because if you've seen that lock icon in your web browser, if you peel back the onion layer to understand how those digital certificates that confirm the server's identity, that's usually brought to you by the RSA algorithm, something that was first introduced to the world in 1977. I fantasize, guys, about, what if RSA got a dime or a nickel, and I'm not greedy, maybe even a penny. Every time somebody saw one of those lock icons, we'd all be retired at this point. But that algorithm has been out for so long, it actually passed out of its patent period in the year 2000. It's been in the public domain for almost 2 decades at this point. Sometimes people hear RSA, they think about RSA Conference, which is the world's largest dedicated information security conference. We did run it this year just in under the wire before the public health crisis set in. We staged it in San Francisco. We are going to be staging it next year, but we're going to stage it a little later in the year, probably in the May timeframe, and that will be a virtual event for us this next year. A typical in-person event, we might have as many as 40 or 45,000 attendees at that event. And then finally, there's RSA the company. RSA the company that I have been part of now for, just over 11 years, believe it or not. I'm based in Fairfax County, Virginia, outside the Washington, D.C. area. So let me kind of segue and talk about the topic at hand. Cloud computing tends to be at the heart of most organizations' digital transformation strategies. So I thought it would probably be a good place to start the conversation about what's driving these critical risks, and more importantly, the associated challenges that they pose for organizations like yours and mine. So if I start by talking about the different dynamics that are really driving cloud risk today, whether you're looking to improve those customer experiences or new products or optimizing efficiencies, or even creating brand new revenue streams. Lots of companies are doing that right now in the midst of what has happened over the last 8 months. Organizations really are starting to rely more on an expanding array of public, private, and hybrid cloud services to meet their business needs. But offloading those applications and the workloads to the cloud can create an array of new security challenges, new risk challenges, including the fact that a lot of times you have very limited visibility into what those users and applications are doing. Cloud tends not to be a very static place, so it's very dynamic, fast-moving technology, and managing access for a very diverse workforce, a workforce that's probably working from home at this point for most of us on the call. There are a lot of third-party implications as well. I'll touch on those a little later. So while many organizations have adopted cloud-first strategies, many of those are quickly moving those workloads, things that typically would have been done on-premise on a physical piece of hardware, they're moving it up to the cloud. And from RSA's perspective, more than 90% of organizations have said that they're going to have some apps, some level of infrastructure in the cloud by the end of this year, 2020. That's actually something that accelerated in the March-April timeframe. I had a number of conversations with customers, large and small, who in the midst of the frantic, how are we going to get all our users connected to our infrastructure from their homes, they were actually pulling forward some of their 2021 planning into 2020, things that they were planning on doing anyway to make their workforces a little more nimble. So then in March and today, towards the end of the year, these moves are kind of creating a lack of monitoring and overall visibility within your software as a service, your platform as a service, your infrastructure as a service, cloud environments. And from your company's perspective, it really limits the ability to understand what those risks are across those environments. So the idea is to be more agile and achieve continuous delivery. CD is the acronym, if that's ringing a bell with you. Organizations really are kind of streamlining their development using DevOps tools today. So we've got a lot of customers at RSA that are moving their DevOps capability up to the cloud to try and get some automation capabilities. to make it easier to change apps on the fly, to bring those products, if you will, to market that much more quickly. IDC, one of the big research firms out there, is estimating that 500 million, as you can see on this slide, 500 million, that's 500 million new applications are going to be created within the next 5 years. And that's equal to the total number of apps that were created over the last 40 years. Final point on the obligatory statistics slide is that your users need anytime access from anywhere. Giving them that flexibility is really an important part of moving all this stuff to the cloud. But when you're dealing with a shared cloud security model, one of your responsibilities, not your cloud providers, your responsibilities is to make sure that you have a strong identity and access management story in place. The statistic here, the 99% that I'm looking at, that's a Gartner estimate, which basically says 99% of cloud security failures between now and 2023. So going out basically 3 years, 99% of those failures are going to be the customer's fault, not the cloud provider's fault, typically because of misconfigurations or access privileges that have been left in place. So that's kind of setting the stage for what we see at RSA as the 3 primary cloud security challenges. We like to kind of look at this through the lens of digital risk and digital risk management. So whether you're standing up your first cloud instance, or if you're a cloud veteran, like many of you are, you've probably already been challenged by not having enough visibility. I've mentioned that V word, visibility, a couple of times. I'm going to come back and land on that in my second intermission, but I'm talking about not just technical visibility, I'm talking about business process visibility as well. Anybody who's in the cloud today is challenged by a lack of that visibility, what's happening with the apps, what's happening with the users, and the administrators, the highly privileged users in that environment. Multi-cloud environments where you might have multiple providers. Maybe you've got some apps served out of AWS and another set out of Google, for example, maybe even another set out of Microsoft's Azure, creates additional problems because those different platforms are exactly that. They're different platforms, their data tends to be walled off from each other. And if somebody's coming to you saying, I need the holistic view of what's happening in all 3 of these environments in one place, it's tough. So that is a challenge. There was a recent Cloud Security Alliance, CSA, Cloud Security Alliance study. Organizations were asked to identify the main contributor to a recent outage that they had experienced. And out of the valid answers, which included things like configuration settings, human error, maybe hardware failures, even cyber attacks, the number one reason, and get this guys, the number one reason was, we don't know. That was the answer. The number one reason for an outage was the customer did not know, which just points to the fact that it is a highly complex organization. KPMG has also released results that say something to the effect of only 1 in 10 organizations can actually analyze 2/3 to 3/4 of their cloud security incidents. There's a technology challenge here. There's a people challenge, a skills challenge as well. And in the face of these challenges in the real world, the bad guys have certainly started to step up, and the public health crisis has only exacerbated that. Bad actors are absolutely exploiting social networking, how we use those cloud services. Think about things like file sharing, Box, Dropbox, Google Drive. Users are getting email invitations to access files, and they're also receiving promotional emails from the vendors themselves, which may or may not be legitimate. So attackers are taking full advantage right now of that well-established workflow. They're phishing their users. They're asking them to review updated privacy agreements, maybe updating their account information. So this is especially dangerous when you think about that targeted user being a highly privileged user within your environment, someone who might have administrative privileges. And I've already talked a little bit about skills. That ongoing cybersecurity skills shortage is not unique in the cloud security space, but they can completely complicate what is a tough situation, make it that much more difficult. The 73% you see there of organizations lacking expertise in cloud native security, that's primarily from a DevOps perspective. I'm seeing it in all verticals, not just in that development vertical, usually running between 75 and 80%. And those cloud offerings that organizations are starting to roll out, when you think about on-premise applications and data, organizations typically own 100% of the security. And as I told you, maybe on the last slide, even if you outsource that to a cloud provider, that cloud provider is going to bring some tools and techniques, but at the end of the day, it's you and your organization that are on the hook for securing the data, whether it's intellectual property for your company, whether it's personally identifiable information for your own downstream customers. These are all areas, these three areas: lacking visibility, credentials that have been compromised, and skills shortage. So when I sit down with my customers and prospects at RSA, I like to kind of mentally frame it out as I have here. We like to kind of start to talk about frameworks, different things that you and I can use to help us make this journey to either get smarter about cloud security or to maybe beef up what we already know about cloud security. There's something funny though about these frameworks. Every framework that you pick up, for instance, maybe the NIST cybersecurity framework. Even if you're not in cybersecurity, you might have heard that CSF, cybersecurity framework. If you haven't, that is pretty much the common standard that many organizations are following today in terms of how to identify assets, understand badness that might be happening in the environment, and remediating that problem. So it could be the NIST cybersecurity framework, potentially applied to the cloud, or any other framework. Every framework that's out there, guys, presents itself as I have on this slide here. I'll point in the right direction. There we go, over here. It looks like a very orderly framework. I've got a crane there and I'm building up each floor and I've got a master plan and it's easy to follow. Some of these frameworks cost money, so they want it to at least look like it's easy to use. The reality, and I'm telling you this having suffered it, and I'm underlying that word suffered it multiple times, is the reality is not nearly as clear as that. The reality kind of looks like this. And if you look at that, you might say, well, Ben, what are you trying to demonstrate here? That's just a cube. Well, it is just a cube. It's got the right number of sides. It's got the right shape. But if you look carefully at it, you'll probably realize that there are two different perspectives for this cube. One of those sides might be in the front. One of those sides might be in the back. When it comes to frameworks, especially frameworks around cloud-based security, perspectives matter. If you are a cloud provider, you might lean towards one set of frameworks. If you are a customer, you can and should lean towards other frameworks. And I've got some good pointers for you in the second half. Regardless of what your perspective is, you might be lucky enough to at least realize that there's multiple perspectives. A lot of these frameworks, after you make your choice, maybe it's the NIST cybersecurity framework, you sit down, you start to apply it against your environment, and you find out that the framework isn't even necessarily a cube. It's kind of like this, kind of an impossible shape, something that's kind of conflicted. Page 6 has this advice, page 49 has conflicting advice. It happens in just about every framework. So one of the things that RSA has tried to do, not just to help our customers, but help out the industry, is we've got a quartet of things that we call risk frameworks. In fact, I will plot those out at the bottom. Get out of the way here: dynamic workforce risk, third-party cyber incident, and multi-cloud, which is what we're talking about today at the far right. Like all frameworks, folks, this is structured as a series of maturity levels. So this is an eye chart, but the good news is if you contact Advizex after this, we'll make sure we get a copy of all of these slides for you. Just know that at the bottom here, where I'm pointing, that first layer is all about organizations that are maybe a little less mature. Maybe things are being done on a firefighting basis. And as you move up the stack, you're finding planning, you're finding automation, you're finding more maturity to handle all four of these areas. So from RSA's perspective, we don't just have these four frameworks. We don't just have this one slide. We actually have some pretty good collateral, things like white papers and very small solution briefs. As I mentioned at the top, multi-cloud is really what we are here to talk to you about today. So this is where I'm going to put the pause button, at least on the first intermission. Before I hand it back to Eric, I just want to fire the shot across your bow. You are going to be hearing from your Advizex and RSA team. We'll probably follow up with you after this conversation today. Whether it is a beer question, hopefully it might be a technology or a solution question. when I come back, when Eric has taken us through the next set of beers, I'm going to walk you through probably 3 major areas of concern, maybe more pessimistically, 3 trenches that I have seen some customers fall into. So that'll kind of be the best practices portion of the talk track today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and reinflate my head, and let's take the spotlight off of me, guys, and let's go back to my friend Eric. Eric, you are on mute right now, my friend, if you are speaking. Interesting, interesting. So let me just key around here just to see who else might actually be here. Tori? Hi there. Just see, we made Tori get back on the camera. She was hoping not to do that. We made her get back up on the camera. No worries. No worries.
That's what I'm here for.
Now I can keep going if we need to, but I know that Eric's got some additional beers for us, right?
Absolutely, we have additional beer.
Well, thank goodness. We were worried you had run off with all the beer, Eric.
I mean, I'm reasonably athletic in my old age, but that might be too big of an ask for my old knees. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, no worries. So yeah, we got plenty of time. Maybe you can take us through another couple of your beers.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So I suggest everybody grabs the beer that has the amazing Union Jack flag look going on. That is Guy Fawkes. Guy Fawkes, if you are familiar with the very popular film from a few years ago, V for Vendetta, the guy who goes by V wears that white mask with the kind of the pointed nose. That is the Guy Fawkes mask. It references an individual who, in an open act of violent sedition, attempted to blow up Parliament in 1605. There is an expression that is used, remember the 5th of November, that is associated with that. And that is Guy Fawkes Day. It's celebrated, in certain, probably not in Parliament, but I think by the people in England. But this is an English mild brown ale with about 5% smoked malt, to refer to the fact that he loaded up the basement area underneath Parliament with gunpowder and was foiled in his attempt to ignite said gunpowder and blow up Parliament. So this beer is released once a year. It's available for about 5 weeks. We release it actually to the public and tap it the first time at the tap room on November 5th. So we are right now in the center of its availability here in Nashville. This is our probably our second most popular seasonal style behind our Oktoberfest, but it has a super short run, but we sell a whole ton of it over the course of 5 weeks. It is a striking can, jumps right off the shelf, as you can imagine, and tells quite a story. So it's a fantastic beer, probably in my top 3 of all of our beers from our entire book. So,
Eric, we weren't anticipating a history lesson today. That is awesome.
I'll bring it. My wife is a professional historian. I'll do everything I can to sound like I know what I'm talking about. She's been infusing me with that knowledge all along. I think one of the coolest parts about this particular beer is sort of the use of English and of English malts, and there's some American hops, obviously, but like I said, that little smoky hint is sort of an intentional nod to the story that's behind it. So it is an American style brown, but using English malts. And there's a lot about what we do that has a sort of thematic, or there's a story behind a lot of the beers that we brew. What I didn't mention about the Rose, the beer that we drank the first time, is that's actually Martin Luther's crest. That rose that's on that it adorns the can is Martin Luther's official crest that he signed his correspondence, or sealed his correspondence with, I should say, when he wrote to various folks in the first half of the 16th century. So pretty cool little tidbits, little nods, I guess, to the historical narrative of each of these beers. So Ron asked the question, tell us some about the brewing part. What makes an ale brown or white or just malt? So I guess the simplest answer to the question is, think about when you put a piece of bread into a toaster. So if you start with a piece of white, bunny bread or Wonder Bread or whatnot, if you put it in the toaster for a few moments, it'll get just lightly brown, just a little bit around the edges, not too much. It would be still relatively somewhat sweet. If you take that bread and you toast it for, say, 35, 45, 50 seconds, it'll start to get a little bit of a brown characteristic and begin to have just a hint of caramelization to it. And if you leave that piece of bread in for, say, 2 minutes, it's going to be very, very brown and relatively dark. And if you leave it in for 5 minutes, it's, burnt, black. So one of the things that gives beer its color is the toasting level of the malt. Now, malt is malted barley. So barley obviously grown all over the world. And basically what the barley is it's toasted into different levels. And so some beers, like most of the light beers that we drink, or that some of us drink, I don't drink, but a lot of people drink, are, use very, very lightly toasted barley. But as a beer gets darker, you incorporate certain sort of toast levels or roast levels and so the beer takes on the color of the toast level of the barley that you incorporated. I liken it to making tea. When you make beer, you're essentially putting the grain into extremely hot water, and so it pulls the flavor and the color from the grain. And if you think about leaving a tea bag for a long period of time in a cup of tea, it gets really dark. If you leave it in for a very short period of time, it's very light. And so that's sort of the color of the beer is a combination of the darkness of the malt coupled with the amount of time that it spends in the boiling water. So Ron, if that gives you that's a thumbs up for your question, that's probably the simplest answer that I can offer for that particular piece. And yes, to Tracy, my wife's job is super cool. So yeah, she's way more awesome than I will ever dream of being. So, she spends her life with 500-year-old artifacts, which is pretty dope. So, she's way cooler than me. So go ahead.
Eric, just a quick question. What is the average alcohol level in your beer?
Well, average is kind of a tough thing. The term that is used on all beers is called alcohol by volume. That's essentially that's similar to if you buy a whiskey or a vodka, or even a wine. If a wine is, say, like 12% alcohol, or a whiskey is 40 proof, whiskeys are really more 80 proof. Proof is twice the alcohol level. So if you buy something that says 80 proof, it's 40% alcohol by volume. So the percentage of the actual liquid composition that's actual ethyl alcohol as opposed to some other form of liquid. In the case of beer, it's predominantly water. Beer is about 95% water. And so you end up with, of that liquid content, in the case of most of these beers, they're right around between 5 and 6.5 to 7% of the liquid content is alcohol. And so that's essentially of a 12-ounce can, 5.x% of that 12-ounce can of liquid is alcohol. The balance is whatever the other contents are, like I said, predominantly water. So so there isn't an average. It's just dependent upon the particular style. Generally speaking, the lighter the beer, the lower the alcohol content. That's a really super 30,000 foot view. That's not always the same, but that's generally the case, that the darker beer commonly has a slightly higher alcohol content. So Ron, another question. Do you drink these at the same temperature? Don't they drink beer in England warmer? They do drink beer in England warmer, primarily because they started drinking beer long before the onset of refrigeration. And so the general everybody sort of grew up with the generally accepted process of this is kind of how we drink beer. There's lots of pubs in England, Ireland, and whatnot that are very old, and they've retrofitted to have cooling and so forth. But it's a little bit of a wives' tale. They do drink beer cold, and they do use ice in England, but they're not as addicted to cold beverages as we are here in the United States. I usually recommend a beer. Beer's most enjoyable at about 40 degrees and above. A lot of times when it comes, if you're drinking it at a restaurant or a bar, it's stored in the kegs that are in the cooler are generally going to be stored at around 30, 33, 34, 35 degrees. The beer's a little bit cold. It's not going to express its full flavor at a super cold temperature. Slight editorial note, the regular sort of domestic beer that you might get, the Budweiser, the Coors, the Miller of the world, those beers really are designed to be drank at that super cold temperature, and that's largely because they are devoid of a significant amount of flavor layers. So they're not intended to be all that flavorful by nature. So they can be enjoyed cold. But anything that's got a little bit more flavor like this Guy Fawkes, I would probably recommend if you took it out of the fridge and it sat out for 5, 7, 8 minutes and just warmed up just a shade, or if you poured it into a glass, it's going to warm up slightly just from contact at that point. So, me personally, I think beer tastes better between 40 and 50 degrees because it's just going to express a lot more of its actual real flavors. The colder something is, the less the chemical compounds that create flavor just in general are slower, at an atomic level. The atoms spin slower at colder temperatures. So those things that express flavor are less expressive at colder temperatures than they are at warmer temperatures.
So, Eric, before we head back to Ben, what would be the next beer that we can enjoy as he goes through his next round?
So, generally accepted theory of beer tasting is that you go lighter to darker, but I'm actually going to throw a bit of a wrench in that. I would like to go ahead and open up the 44, which is the coffee porter. We're going to end with the special because I just think that's the best way to finish this discussion. So we'll go to the porter, then we'll drink the hoppy beers, and we'll finish with the special. So the 44, as you probably could guess, is a reference to POTUS 44. It used to be called colloquially POTUS 44 before this beer was actually put in cans. There's a few federal regulations about using the word POTUS or the letters POTUS in any kind of a printed format without the express written condition of the office of POTUS. So this is the 44. It is sort of an homage to, it's a head nod, if you will, to former President Obama. It's actually made with a combination of Hawaiian and Kenyan coffee. So if anybody remembers that's sort of his lineage, right? Like his father was from Kenya and he was born in Hawaii. So it's a little bit of kind of a ha-ha to those aspects of his background. But this is a very classic English style, robust porter and infused with coffee. It's not really a lot of coffee. We take just a little bit of coffee and grind it and drop it in. It's almost like a tea bag, really, just to be able to allow that to steep some of the flavors in during the boil process of the beer. So it's kind of mahogany dark in color with just a little hint of the coffee on the nose and the palate. One of the challenges of working with coffee is that you can get really green vegetal notes if it's not used properly. So we're very judicious with the amount that we use because we just want it to have a sort of an element of it without it being too heavy. So we're particularly proud just of the way this beer drinks. Porters, I guess, super fast backstory. Porters originated in England as well. They are called porters because this is the beer or the type of beer, this darker beer that was a little bit less appealing to the bourgeoisie upper echelon. This was the leftover beer that was often drank by the working folks, literally by the porters, the people that carried the bags for wealthier people. When they, were able to finally peel off from their duties of carrying things around for the wealthy, they got kind of the seconds, if you will. And so the name porter, literally for this darker style of beer, is where that term originated. It's referencing that. So kind of a fun sort of history of that particular style. But I love this beer. A porter is my personal favorite style of darker beer just because it's the right balance of coffee notes, malted character, and just a little hint of hop. So it's just a really beautiful balanced beer with a lot of layers, a lot of things going Ryan asked a question, do I source the coffee locally? Actually, we do. There is a local coffee roaster. It's called Frothy Monkey. And we have worked with them for quite some time on sourcing coffee from them. So we do definitely have a very direct partnership between our friends here in Nashville, and between us and those guys. We love those guys. They pour this beer pretty regularly in their bars, especially in the wintertime. And we enthusiastically drink their coffee all the time. So.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So shall I pick up from here, Mr. Finch?
Hey man, if you got more to teach us, teach.
I
You're
do.
So much more. You're so much more interesting than me. I really need to just go ahead and like sit back and let you talk.
What I don't have is a great history story, and I think I heard a little science in there as well. So you're a double threat.
I am a Reformation man. Maybe not a Renaissance man, but a Reformation man.
Excellent. So guys, just like before, 10 to 12 minutes, and then I promise I'm going to hand you right back to the subject matter expert, Mr. Finch. Let me kind of talk about, I hinted before that there were kind of three main problem areas. And if you are doing anything in the cloud security space, either today or tomorrow, I've already mentioned this three-letter acronym in case it got by you the first time. CSA, or the Cloud Security Alliance, is the one resource that you and your organization should always, always, always start with. They are a professional association. They have a lot of free collateral. You can give them some money and they've got other information, but 95% of my customers get everything they need straight off the CSA website. One of their great pieces of collateral, something called the top threats to cloud computing. They call it the egregious 11. I think you might need to pull out your dictionary there. And what they do in this piece of collateral is they break out kind of, as you might guess, 11 distinct areas, problem areas that they have seen real world organizations struggle with when it comes to securing their cloud estate or their cloud infrastructure. So from my perspective, as I'm kind of looking over at the slide here, things like data breaches at number 1. Yep, that's kind of important. Account hijacking at number 5, absolutely important. I spent some time already on number 8, kind of the whole concept of the weak control plane. That's code for, do you know where your highly privileged users are inside the cloud environment? Has your cloud provider given you enough visibility into what those users, those admins are doing? But I'm going to focus in here, guys, on 3 specific types of risks. So this is where I'm going to pivot from the 11 great places to start that CSA has put out in front of you. From RSA's perspective, I want to talk a little bit about identity. You'll see I'm going to pull that out of point number 4. I'm going to talk about insider threat. And then out of point number 10, there's that V word one more time, visibility. These are kind of the top 3, at least from RSA's perspective. These are probably the top 3 areas where we have had the most conversations. We can hopefully provide the most answers and certainly the best expertise in these areas specifically. So when we think about identity, I'm going to actually combine 2 of those here on this one slide. Identity and the insider threat. Insider threat, right, typically refers to an employee. Could be a malicious employee who's bent on removing, if not stealing, intellectual property. You typically hear about insider threats, at least in the press, as it relates to people who were either on their way out of an organization or they had already left an organization. Somehow they were still able to get access to the information. If you don't have a good handle around the identities, plural, inside your environment, you're just flat out not going to know if you are at risk for insider threat. There's actually been a lot of good studies, academic studies that have been done, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, obviously, which is today's topic. Most forms of insider threat break out into 3 distinct areas. IT sabotage, IP theft, that is not internet protocol theft, that's intellectual property theft, and then outright fraud. The vast majority of all insider threat instances, especially in the world of information technology, they're going to fall into one or more of these 3 buckets. So that's one good way, almost a framework, wink, wink, to start thinking about your cloud estate, these three use cases. How is your cloud vendor prepared to assist you as it relates to sabotage, as it relates to theft, as it relates to fraud? Some can help you in all three of those areas, and others you're going to be responsible for bringing that tooling. When we actually talk about the word identity, it's a lot more complicated than you think, especially when you get into the cloud. You might have a customer relationship management platform where you store information about your customers. Think about a company like Salesforce, for example. You might have an account there. Maybe your employer, like mine, uses Workday as an HR tool. That's yet another cloud platform that if you are managing it, you're consuming both those solutions, Salesforce and Workday, kind of as software as a service, SaaS-based solutions. So when we think about identities, who has access to which accounts is absolutely critical. And there is a common problem area, if I can, in the world of identity, and it's this joiner, mover, leaver challenge. Another three-letter acronym for you, the JML challenge. Think about when you started working at your company that you work at today. When you joined at the beginning of your employment, you probably were provisioned with access to one or multiple systems. Most of us live in a Microsoft Windows world, so you probably have an Active Directory account, for example. So that joining stage is very important for that new employee to get provisioned with all the access he or she needs so that he or she can be as productive as quickly as possible. Companies that I talk to will say, yeah, we've got our arms around that. Some of it's automated, some of it's manual, but we typically don't have people that fall through the cracks at that joining phase. Then when somebody terminates at the end of their relationship with your company, whether they voluntarily leave or if they are ejected, there's a deprovisioning that needs to occur. All those accounts that have been built up over time since day one, you need to remove that access. Sounds obvious, right? A lot of companies struggle with that L, with the leaving step. That tends to be sometimes a little more manual than they would like to admit. But as hard as those two ends are, the joining end and the leaving end, it's the stuff in the middle. It's that M, the mover, that is the most challenging. The mover is the person who started 3 years ago and got promoted. So congratulations to you, but now you've got a different job responsibility. Maybe you get promoted a second time, or maybe you move to a different geography where the legal requirements are a little different. There's this concept of entitlement creep, and we see it a lot in a lot of cloud-based providers where end users had access at the beginning and now they've got maybe additional access and they got additional access, and that entitlement creep is not a good thing. I've been at RSA for 11 years. That was 3 job titles ago. For me, should I still be provisioned with the same set of entitlements to systems, to applications that I had on my very first day of employment? Shaking my head, definitely the answer is no. I should not, your folks should not either. That accumulation of privileges over time is much easier to encounter when you're in a cloud-based environment. Cloud vendors are very bent on making things easy for you as a customer. They're smart business people. And you can do things like bulk create accounts very easily. You can do that with some of your on-prem infrastructure as well. But that's one of the pitches that you hear from cloud providers. Pitches in a sense of it's absolutely accurate. It's not a misrepresentation. They want to make it easier for you to provision accounts, potentially deprovision or take those privileges away. But over time, if you're not paying attention to this joiner, mover, leaver problem, I can guarantee that your cloud security attack surface is going to be much larger than you would like it to be. There's also this concept around insider threats. Malicious insiders aren't necessarily just employees. They could be contractors, people who are on and off the payroll because they are providing certain specific requirements to you and your organization. This is typically where I would branch out to a 60-minute conversation just to talk about third parties who could also be malicious insiders. A lot of organizations will provision accounts in the cloud for their third parties so that those third parties can come in to do their work, upload data, download data, which is all within their remit, within the contract, it's allowed. But sometimes, and you've probably read about some of these instances much as I have in the press, sometimes those contractors, those third parties are over provisioned. They have too much access to the environment. In a Salesforce type environment, to go back to that example, that could mean that maybe that contractor who's only supposed to be able to add records has accidentally been given the ability to modify records or even delete records. So don't stop by thinking about, I've got all my insiders, my employees, I've got that covered. Think about your contractors, think about your third parties in particular. And maybe most importantly, this is the #1 organizational challenge that I see in most organizations that I consult with. Too many organizations don't leverage human resources as a means to monitor for this insider threat. HR tends to know a lot of things about a lot of people. Somebody's start date, somebody maybe who's put in his or her notice already. That information isn't typically shared broadly across the organization. It's sensitive, I get that. But especially from an insider threat perspective, it's kind of important that HR do its best to notify the security team that somebody is either about to be terminated or someone has been terminated or at least has put in their notice. The reason this is important is the most dangerous 60 days when it comes to insider threat is the 30 days prior to that person resigning and the 30 days after that person is terminated. The first one might be obvious. They're getting ready to leave. They put in their notice. Maybe they've scooped up everything they want before they leave. The second one's less obvious. After they've been terminated, 30 days, really? Yes, that goes back to the JML problem, the L, the leaving. A lot of organizations don't do a very good job cutting off that access in an appropriate amount of time. So many times these attacks are coming from ex-employees, ex-contractors after they have actually left. For extra points here, guys, I'm actually going to rotate us here to the book cam just for about 30 seconds. The book cam is showing you right now the best $60 you can buy in this space. If you are interested in insider threats, specifically around information technology, the CERT Guide to Insider Threats, 3 different authors. This is a great piece of collateral out of CERT, C-E-R-T, the Computer Emergency Response Center up in Pittsburgh. The book's about 10 years old. It is chock full of real world stories of insider threats. And that 60 days I just talked to you about is a statistic that they have deduced out of all of the hundreds of insider threat events that they have managed. Keeping my eye on the clock, guys. I've just got a few more minutes here. So I want to talk a little about visibility as well. When most vendors in the information security space talk to you about visibility, they're talking to you about logs. That's your security information event management, or your SIEM, your log management platform. 10 years ago, that might have been the right answer. Today, it is absolutely not if you're trying to achieve technical visibility across your cloud environment. You need to be able to collect network traffic, things like collecting packets over time. There are a handful of vendors out there that can collect network traffic from the cloud, and one of them is speaking to you right now. We'd love to talk to you more about that. NetFlow is a great protocol originally from Cisco that's good for east-west traffic. If you have one or more data centers in your architecture, that is a cost-effective means to get better visibility. And then, of course, endpoints, physical devices, could be mobile devices, VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure. A lot of organizations are serving the end user's desktop experience virtually through the cloud. All of these things together, logs, packets, NetFlow, endpoint, are what we believe comprise a good take when you take a look at technical. Things like vulnerability management, understanding what the vulnerabilities, not just of your infrastructure, but that of your third parties, rounds that out. And then on the business column side, we're having a lot of conversations with folks that are moving into another 3-letter acronym, Robotic Process Automation, or RPA, which is basically robots or code that's been built to scrape data out of this tool, typically a legacy tool, and insert or add it to a second tool, typically one that might live up into the cloud. There is not really good visibility into how those processes run. There are entire companies today that have stood themselves up as workflow agents, understanding that visibility is not just a technical issue, it includes business processes. It includes visibility into the contracts that you have with the third parties. Maybe you have a service level agreement with one or more of those third parties. Maybe those third parties are obligated to notify you, hey, I'm a cloud provider of yours, we were breached. If you are covered by the GDPR, that's the huge European privacy regulation that came out a couple of years ago, you're actually on the hook to provide notifications within pretty much 3 days, which is a very accelerated timeline for most companies. So if you don't have visibility into that environment, if your cloud provider doesn't have enough visibility so they can turn that around within 72 hours to announce it, that might be time to look for a new partner. There are other changes, other regulatory changes. If you're doing business in California, the CCPA came out earlier. That's another privacy set of rules. And then finally, from a business perspective, you need to understand what your exit plan is from that cloud provider. Is the data portable? Are they going to know who the users are? Are they going to take care of the deprovisioning, et cetera? Okay, I'm going to land the plane here, guys. So 3 main areas that RSA can provide value to you. We can help you with a cloud risk assessment and provide guidance, both as it relates to technical issues and business issues. We can help you perform identity analytics and continuous monitoring. So you've got that visibility. You can see if a person has changed his or her behavior. There's a 4-letter acronym, User, Entity, and Behavioral Analysis, UEBA. We've got a solution in that space. And then we can help you get deep visibility across your entire cloud estate so that your CSPs, your cloud service providers, are going to be able to respond more quickly when they have risks. I'm going to go ahead and build out this slide just to demonstrate that, yes, we have a risk management platform, which goes by the Archer brand. We have a threat detection and response offering through the RSA Net Witness platform. Our identity portfolio is brought to you by the Secure ID brand. We have a fraud and risk intelligence suite. And as you might guess, we have a services arrangement as well. We have an incident response practice. Not a lot of organizations realize that about RSA. So I fired this warning shot at you at the end of the first half. We are now at the end of the second half, the second intermission. You will hear from your Advizex and RSA partner out of this event, both to kind of get a sense of, was it a good event? Was the information that the talking head brought you of any use at all, et cetera? Eric, as I kind of pass this back over to you, you know, you and I kind of had a quick conversation as we were starting. We were kind of comparing notes about some of the challenges we've seen with businesses of all sizes. You know, RSA has about 3,000 employees. We got customers all over the spectrum, large, medium, and small. From your perspective, are you seeing, maybe your suppliers, maybe even you guys yourselves, are you seeing any challenges as it relates to the real world that we're living in from a profitability perspective?
There are multiple challenges. One of the largest when it comes to profitability is the impact of social distancing and gathering and restaurant sort of regulatory limitations on being able to have people visit our tap room and other tap rooms in the brewing industry. You know, there's margins in beer are fairly lean at different stages. And so one of the places where margin is maximized is in a taproom environment. And so the fact that there have been significant, impacts on taproom visitation as a result of COVID related restrictions has definitely had a pretty dramatic impact on that. Then you couple that with the affect on just the bar and restaurant industry in general. Most brands like ours that are kind of small to medium sized rely pretty heavily on the restaurant and bar environment to support that. You know, your kegs of beer at your local bar from your local brewery are a large portion of what they sell. It costs a lot more money to put beer into cans or bottles and then run it through the process of selling it into a liquor store or a grocery store or a package store. And again, there's margins that are leaner along the way when you do that. So draft beer is where the vast majority of the money is made in the small brewing industry. So because the restaurant and bar side has been restricted so greatly, that's been a huge impact on profit margins for those of us in the brewing industry. Now, we've made up some of that here and there because the volume in the grocery and retail channels definitely gone up. Obviously, people are buying a lot more beer to drink at home than they are out, and we've been fortunate that we've had some opportunities to put some of our products in higher velocity grocery environments here in Tennessee, and so that's made a pretty significant difference in our ability to kind of buoy some of our losses from the restaurant side. But to be totally frank, I mean, there's just a percentage you just can't get back. If you can't put people in your tap room and people aren't in bars in the same volume and velocity, it just takes a pretty good sized bite out of the apple.
Yeah.
And so there's really the only option there is to just, buckle in. I mean, there's been obviously some PPP opportunities, and we've been blessed to be able to have that. The state of Tennessee has been very generous in doing some grant programming that's definitely helped us along the way. So there's been some opportunities to offset that with substitutionary resources, but it doesn't make up the ground at all. We just look forward optimistically to, the next couple of years being able to sort of help us dig out of this a little bit. And at the end of the day, you have to make great product. I think in any business, it doesn't matter whether it's, cloud computing solutions or beer or, burgers and fries. Like if you don't exude excellence from everything that you do, whatever service you provide, whatever can you provide, whatever's in a wrapper or on a plate or you name it, it's got to be great. And that's how you're going to survive these tougher times. If your product's good, you'll make it. If it's not, you won't.
And that's true for anybody bringing a product to market, right?
100%.
Certainly RSA as well. Eric, I actually had two questions that I did not see at the very end. So if I can just address those quickly.
Go ahead.
Tom, you asked about, do all these cloud products do the same for on-prem organizations?
I think we might have lost Ben there. Eric, we did have one question while Ben comes back on. One of the questions that came in on the Q&A is,
sure.
What sparked the idea of historical callbacks for your beers?
So, I actually messaged Ryan offline a little bit on that. So I think it's probably the best way to describe it is that our company, our owners and our company have sort of a reverence for world history and for religious history. Obviously, if we named our brewery after, the church where Martin Luther was, where he drafted his 95 Theses, and just that's sort of just central to what the owners care about as people. And so the historical callbacks, I think, they're born out of that being the genesis of our brand concept. And so, there's a lot of ways to stand out in whatever industry that you're in. Everybody needs an angle or, a calling card or whatever sort of colloquial term you want to attach to that. In our particular case, it's sort of leaning into that brand concept a little bit in a meaningful way. So we utilize some of that, and that's present actually in the next beer we're going to drink, the 5 Points IPA that'll come up after, once Ben comes back on and finishes up. But
Ben is here. His network is flapping right now, so I apologize. My bad, guys.
Tom, for the record, I didn't do it. For the record, Ben, I didn't do it.
Well, I want to make sure I answer these questions in case I flap one more time on my end. Tom asked, do all these cloud providers do the same for on-prem? Typically not, Tom. They do. Good cloud providers will have APIs, API level connectivity to kind of plug back into what they would call legacy infrastructure, your on-prem. That's actually the sign of a pretty good cloud provider if they recognize that, like you and me, we live in the real world and we're going to have some on-prem architecture. So being able to hook into that either from a monitoring perspective, that's typically a good sign, but not everybody has that ability. Ryan asks, does RSA have tools to help close? Yeah.
I think what Tom was asking is the cloud products that you were talking about, do they cover on-prem? Not cloud providers, but cloud products.
Apologies. Thank you for clarifying, Mr. Duffield. So from RSA's product perspective, kind of that last slide that I went through, we actually deliver everything that's in the RSA portfolio, both as an on-prem offering and as a cloud offering. So depending upon your needs, we can deliver just about everything to you in the cloud. As you might guess, everything that we have on our boat today originally started as an on-prem offering, and we continue to sell products. So even if you're in a mixed environment, if visibility is something you need help with in the cloud, but identity is something you need help with on-premise, we can help you with both of those areas. Hopefully that is more on topic. So thank you for that redirect, Jeremy. Ryan also asked, does RSA have tools that help close the gap between HR and IT? Absolutely. That's where our risk management platform comes in, being able to bring both those parties together. HR, as I mentioned, gets a little nervous about sensitive data. So the Archer platform, that's our integrated risk management platform, can selectively show just certain pieces of information to people outside of HR and can actually build workflows, automated workflows out of that information. So the quick answer, Ryan, is yes. If and when you want to come talk to us, that's probably going to be an Archer conversation. So with that, I will keep an eye for any other questions, which we'd be able to take at the end. But Eric, fingers crossed, I will be able to watch you go through the rest of the beers.
Well, yeah, fingers crossed, toes crossed, whatever we have to cross, let's cross it up. So I got a question on the along the way about on the chat about high gravity brewing, and so I'll speak to that just a little bit before we jump into the next beer. So in a general sense, high gravity sort of defines anything that is give or take 8% alcohol by volume and above. Beer pretty much doesn't go past about 12. It's hard to do it without adding a lot of extra sugar to the process. The amount of actual physical sugar that's in grain, it really requires some boosting in order for there be enough alcohol produced during the fermentation process. So we personally at Black Abbey don't brew a ton of beer that's above around 8%. We do a handful of them, but by and large, it's pretty difficult to do without the addition of sugar. And it sounds like a bad idea, but I guess just from a chemical standpoint, fermentation is essentially the consumption of sugar by yeast to create carbon dioxide and ethyl alcohol. So from a raw sort of basic chemical standpoint, whenever you ferment something, you're creating an alcohol content. Well, the yeast really only feeds on sugar. And so if you want to create alcohol or boost an alcohol level without it, or when it needs more sugar than is naturally available in the grains, you have to add a certain aspect to that. And that's generally how that happens. Those are more common to certain types of styles. The last beer we're going to drink is the Special, is a Belgian double. It does actually follow that arc, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail when we get to that beer here in a couple minutes. But it really is not a bad thing, though. There's no sugar left. It's not really that you're going to get any sweetness or anything like that. The quantities of sugar are added with intent to be completely consumed. They are there strictly for the presence of the creation of alcohol, not for the addition of sweet flavors. So that's generally what happens as far as quote unquote high gravity brewing is concerned. So hopefully that answered that question. And feel free to either pop in or continue to put stuff in the chat if you have technical questions like that. But
actually, Eric, what I'm going to do here is I know that Ben is done with his presentation. What I'd like to do is I think we got 3 beers left. Maybe we'll get to 1, maybe 2. But if everybody would like, go ahead and unmute yourself. We'll take the rest of the time here and just kind of have an open forum. If everybody just wants to chit chat as Eric goes through the rest, definitely want to hear your guys' take on especially the beer, because I may be the cause of the aluminum can shortage here in Ohio. but this is some really good beer. It's a fantastic, great flavor.
Thank you.
Great color. But if everybody wants to just kind of open this up here and just have a little bit of fun here, as we can ask questions to Ben and Eric as we go through. So I'm going to kind of turn the spotlight off here. If people just want to turn on their video and just kind of have some fun here, it's just kind of have some fun. And Ben, if you want to take us into the next beer, I think it'd be fantastic.
Ben, take us into the next beer, buddy. Come on.
You know, I'd love
Ben,
to take you into the
sorry,
next
Eric.
beer. Sadly, I have no beer here. So Eric, can you help me somehow?
Ben,
Maybe.
that's why your system doesn't work, Ben, because you don't have any beer. You gotta feed these things from time to time. You know, they require some love. You know, beer is good for that purpose. So, y'all, go ahead and grab the 5 Points IPA next. We're gonna go into that guy. It's actually called 5 Points. It's an interesting double entendre because we have a kind of a trendy hip neighborhood here in Nashville. Like many cities around, I'm from Denver originally. We had a 5 Points in Denver. There seems to be a 5 Points in almost every city because randomly somebody thought, oh, hey, let's put an extra road in this four-way intersection. That seems logical.
Yeah,
So,
how many stop signs do you have at your 5 points?
there's 2 stop lights actually that make up the intersection. So it's all flavors of confusing for sure. But so the irony though is that is really not why this beer is called that. It is just coincidence. It's actually called 5 Points to reference the 5 points of Calvinism, and the tulip that's on the can is used as a mnemonic device because the 5 points of Calvinism are, and this is really, really deep, so just bear with me, but total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and preservation of the saints. So, you know, good old John Calvin, he was a very, he was a deep thinker, had a lot of opinions, but he gave us this beautiful mnemonic device, I guess, to put a tulip on a beer. This is a West Coast style IPA. This is made with Cascade and Citra hops. This is generally agreed to be a little more reminiscent of the older interpretation of, or more original forms of IPA that came out of the Pacific Northwest and Northern California 20 some odd years ago when IPA first started becoming popular. So this is definitely a callback to not the trend. This is much more of a classic interpretation of the India Pale Ale. I am a particular fan of this. I love Cascade hops. It's one of my favorite hop characteristics. It gives you some nice pine character. It gives you some nice light grapefruit character. It's very balanced when it comes to malt. It's a very, very full flavored, multi-dimensional beer. A lot like the 44, like lots of layers, lots of kind of nuanced flavor all the way up and down the beer. And we really love it for that reason. This is the first IPA that we made as a brewery. And it, you know, as you can probably notice, we have a penchant for history. And so there's those little, you know, there's a lot of those moments, much to the question that was asked earlier about history. We do like to kind of bring those pieces into the equation as much as possible. So any questions or thoughts on that from the gallery?
Does it pair well with 5 Points pizza?
It pairs beautifully with 5 Points pizza. Absolutely. But let me just say that breathing pairs well with 5 Points pizza. Okay.
Yes, I've heard great things.
It is the finest of the fine when it comes to the pizza in Nashville. Yes.
So Eric, where do you guys get your hops at?
It really depends.
You guys grow your own?
No. Hops don't grow well in Tennessee. It's not really the right climate. You've got to be further north in order to grow hops. You need a lot more moisture and a lot cooler evening temperatures than you can in the south. You can grow some here, but they tend to be they just don't have the same flavor. So the vast majority of hops are grown in the Pacific Northwest. They're grown in Washington, Idaho, and Oregon and very, very northern California is where the huge majority of hops for American beer come from. There are hops also grown in Australia. There are hops grown in Germany, in different parts of England and Scotland. So they really.
I know about three Cascade hop plants that are growing here in Ohio because they're at my old house when I planted them.
Ah, perfect. Well, that's great. Yeah. I hope you were able to get them to cultivate them well. Ohio probably is, northern Ohio anyway, is probably at about the similar, latitudinal level. Like most organic, most things grow better at certain latitudes. Hops, generally speaking, grow a little bit better, a little bit further north from where I am here in Nashville. So above the 40th parallel normally is what they say.
Yeah, it took about 3 years, and I had to wrap them around my deck because hops grow about 26 to 28 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
And so I trained them to wrap around the deck, and took about 3 years because the first year the roots kind of do their thing. But I was able to get about 3 or 4 harvests out of them a year. And I brewed did home brewing for a while with the first 3 batches.
Nice.
And then the fourth and fifth, we'd make hop pillow bags. Because
Great.
if you crush the hops, the smell of the hops actually makes you tired. So my mom would sew them into pillows for people.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, hops are also obviously a preservative. That's what their original purpose was for, was to preserve the liquid so that it could be either transported or consumed over a longer period of time. It didn't spoil quite as quickly with the presence of hops in it. So the other IPA is the one that is in the bright red can that features the Tennessee TriStar. And that is the Tennessee, or TN IPA, as we lovingly call it. Yep, that guy right there. That boy has the emblem of the well-known emblem of Tennessee. We have the unique privilege in Tennessee of having the largest ratio between height and width as far as the number of miles in the state. We're about 665 miles east to west and about 150 miles north to south. And so it lends itself to the state being sort of easily divisible into 3 parts. So the 3 stars recognize the 3 grand divisions of Tennessee, which is east, middle, and west. And so a lot of Tennessee things feature the TriStar logo as a result. So the Tennessee IPA, there is we use the term flyover because when you fly from the East Coast to the West Coast, you end up flying over Tennessee. So this is kind of an interesting blend of the West Coast ideas that are in the 5 Points you just drank and what is really popular right now, which is the Northeast style or hazy style IPA. So this beer is unfiltered, but it is not specifically designated as a hazy or New England. So we just call this a flyover IPA, I guess, for lack of a better term. So it's dry hopped with two newer hops called Huell Melon and Cashmere. And those are basically intended to create a flavor profile that's reminiscent of a little bit of honeydew melon, a little bit of strawberry, a little bit of candied peach, and some nice kind of very aromatic, tropical, maybe even notes. So it's the same style of beer, but it is a completely different tasting experience from the 5 Points, as is probably easily recognizable to everybody. Ron, thank you. Several beer tasting demos. Special thanks. Yeah, there's a lot of things we can say thanks COVID to, right? Yeah. But thank you for the compliment on the beer. I really appreciate that. Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. That is one of my all-time favorite beers. I remember when I was probably maybe old enough to drink, that was one of the first things that I had that was not just a regular old beer. And so, yeah, my love for hoppy beer started with Sierra Nevada Pale. There is a lot of that same flavor concept, that West Coast style. Cascade hops are the predominant hop in a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. So that's not surprising that you're picking up the similarities between those 2 beers, Ron. So a heck of a palate on that, on you there, buddy. Nice job. And then Ryan asked where we distributed. So we are only sold in the state of Tennessee. We are evaluating the potential of going outside into some other states, but that conversation happened at the very beginning of the year before things got weird. And now obviously we have a little bit of out digging from the fiscal challenges we were describing earlier. So we will consider some distribution north and or south of Tennessee, probably in late 21 or early 22, but right now we're pretty cool where we are we need to continue to maximize what we're doing in our own space. I think, again, you talk about smart business practice, you have to own your backyard as much as you can with, particularly in an industry like ours, it's a commodity industry that has such a reliance on locality as a part of its sort of establishing market share. So it's really crucial that we continue to strengthen our backyard operations as much as we can before we get too crazy about extending. So, perhaps look for us in the next couple of years as we expand outward where possible. So, I'll be your Huckleberry. Thanks, Ryan. Do love a good Tombstone reference. Man, that brings it all together. Louisville, Kentucky. I would say Louisville probably would be a place if we did go into another area. Louisville would probably be a pretty strong potential. Nothing would make me happier than going to the Holy Grail and drinking one of my Black Abbey beers at the Holy Grail. I feel like there would be a moment of synergy that would be tough to pass up on that. So, Scott Carmichael, come to Nashville and come have a great time. You can pick some up at our brewery if you look us up online. We're right just south of downtown, about 2 miles south of downtown, and you can come directly into the Fellowship Hall and pick up any of these beers and a lot more. And pretty much every major liquor and beer package store in the Nashville metro area has a pretty good selection of our beer. We've done a pretty nice job over the years of getting a pretty strong presence across the board. So that's you'll find us wherever. But I would be remiss if I didn't say, please come to the tap room, come to Fellowship Hall, and come enjoy a couple beers with us on site. That would be amazing.
Tell them Advizex and RSA sent you.
Sure, yeah, we'll do that. Absolutely. Yeah, Ben and Jeremy sent me, and they were like, "Oh, okay, well that's great." Well, our head brewer's name is Ben. Now Ben looks a lot different than you, Ben. There's some significant differences between our Ben and you, Ben, but that's okay. We'll find a happy medium in there somewhere. The last beer, just if you guys want to dive in, is the Special. The Special is we're bookending with another Belgian style. This is our Belgian double. Now, a double is a classic Belgian style, or double, or as some people say it with a little more of a long U. That beer is has some similar notes to the Rose in that it has a little hint of clove and banana. Now that comes from the use of the same yeast. They both use a traditional Belgian yeast, and so that's some of the what are called esters that are flavors that are produced during the fermentation process. This one's a little different because we put just a little hint of orange peel in the boil so that it adds just a little bit of citrus character. And then this one also uses just a hint of Belgian candy sugar. I mentioned a few minutes ago about sugar being in addition to help create a higher alcohol level. This one is 7.4%, so it is just a shade higher than some. The key is to add the sugar to give it a little bit of mouthfeel, make it feel a little smoother, because as alcohol goes up, it tends to add some sharpness to the flavor. And so the idea here is to be able to get some little added alcohol level without compromising the richer, fuller body that you get from this particular style. Belgian doubles are very commonly this kind of medium brown color, almost maybe a hint of orange color. The rooster is present on there. Martin Luther, again, one of our favorite friends, used the rooster a lot as a sermon illustration. There are a lot of roosters used in weather vanes, and the weather vane on the top of the steeple that the Black Cloister or the Black Abbey is named for, there was a rooster on the weather vane that was on the top of Martin Luther's church. So again, one more of these callbacks to our kind of our brand ethos. I think that's really important. I think one of the things you have to do in business is be true to yourself. And so this is who we are. We're regular dorky guys who like history and like beer and who have religious backgrounds, and we don't wear it outwardly, but it certainly informs a lot of how we think about taking care of doing business and taking care of people. And just those little call outs are just kind of an indication of us as people. And so we really love the fact that we have an opportunity to share our love of beer with as many people as possible. This to me is a phenomenal, cool way to connect with people who can only hear me and unfortunately have the disprivilege of looking at my face on a screen. But I certainly love to talk about beer, love to share beer with other people, and you know, it's sort of the lifeblood of my life and our life. And I hope you guys have enjoyed drinking through our portfolio of products today. So I'll answer any questions if anybody has anything else they want to toss out there.
So, Eric, I just want to thank you.
Yeah.
You know, like I said in my post, I've done a lot of these demos, beer tasting. It's been the go-to for COVID and things, and these are some really spectacular beers, and my hat's off to the brewers.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Scott, you better pick me up some beer while you're down there because I know you. But for everyone, we want to just thank everybody for joining today. Hopefully you guys had some good time, got some good information from Ben, but most importantly, enjoyed the beer here from Eric. So Tori, my hat's off to you. Great pick. I just can't say enough. This is love the history. Got a lot of people that talked about the history that you guys enjoy, and fantastic. So is there any questions from anybody before we kind of shut down here and let you guys get back to daily lives? Anything else that you guys have? Any questions? All right. Well, thanks everyone. Hope everyone has a great evening. I want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving and be safe out there. And thanks again for joining.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Jeremy, Ben, it was great. Eric as well.